Hello everybody and welcome to the Spoiler Warning Podcast. This is review number 608 with a review of Just Mercy. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And if you're joining us for the first time, the Spoiler Warning Podcast is a weekly film review program. Each week in the show we're going to dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest film releases coming to a streaming platform near you. This week we are sort of maybe a little bit breaking the format. It's been 2 weeks since George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis police. And in the 2 weeks since, there have been protests around the country, I think now in every single state.
Yeah.
And there have been videos coming out about police brutality at all these protests, and it's bringing it to the forefront. And it's a thing that I think no person in the United States right now can sort of go about their daily lives without paying attention to it and seeing it. This past week, Warner Brothers came out and they announced that they're going to release this film that we're reviewing, Just Mercy, for free to everybody. And a bunch of other studios, including Paramount and other people, have come on board too since. And now, if you go to iTunes right now, there is a section in iTunes called Black in America. And it's featuring 18 films that deal with racial injustice. And we have chosen this week, in addition to another review that we'll do that'll get released later, we are going to be talking about Just Mercy, which, as we said, is now available for free.
And we do have a little bit of history, if not with this movie. Destin Daniel Cretton came on the scene with Short Term 12 many years ago, which I think Christopher and I both loved. I routinely reference it as a movie that kind of brought me into, I would say, like the empathetic new wave of cinema, like movies that are really just meant to tell a story and kind of elicit empathy for the main characters. So I was pretty excited about this movie. Going into TIFF, it was one of the films that I think it premiered before we got there, or somehow the timing didn't work out.
Yeah.
And then somehow in the end of the year shuffle, I think maybe they launched this movie in early January or something. It kind of came and went a little bit too quickly. So yeah. I was particularly happy for a chance to revisit it this weekend.
Yeah, so we're going to bring you this review now. So we are going to go ahead and start by just taking a listen to the trailer for Just Mercy, and then we are going to come back and give you guys a review.
Tell me everything that happened. The first time I visited Death Row, I wasn't expecting to meet somebody the same age as me. From a neighborhood just like ours. Could have been me, Mama.
But what you're doing is gonna make a lot of people upset.
You always taught me to fight for the people who need the help the most. Your life is still meaningful, and I'm gonna do everything possible to keep them from taking it. You don't know what you're into down here in Alabama when you're guilty from the moment you're born.
God.
Mr. McMillan.
We done here.
Mr. McMillan, please.
I was just about to give up when I got a call from a Harvard lawyer looking to start a legal center for inmates on death row. I was in before he even offered me the job.
You the lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for driving all the way out here. Most lawyers barely make time to call.
I can't believe you talked to all my people and say you're gonna fight for me.
I did.
It mean a lot.
If you go digging in those wounds, you're gonna be making a lot of people very unhappy.
When people care about a thing that much, they'll do anything to get what they want.
When I first learned about all of this, it was like looking at a river full of drowning people and not having any way of helping them.
You ain't quitting, is you?
No, sir. Each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. I know what it's like to be in the shadows.
It's my dad. He do nothing wrong.
It's never too late for justice.
You're the only one kid enough to fight for me.
If we can look at ourselves closely, we can change this world for the better. We all need grace. We all need mercy.
I got my truth back. You gave that to me. And ain't nobody gonna take that from us.
All right, so that was the trailer for Just Mercy. It follows a character or a person. This is a real life story. It follows a person named Bryan Stevenson, who is a civil rights defense attorney, and basically he moves to Alabama and starts taking on these death row cases where he has a grant from the government to go in and do this pro bono work, and he comes across a man named Walter McMillan who is on death row, and his particular case is just say that the prosecutors had nothing and convicted and sentenced this man to death. And it's the story of him trying to fight to at the very least try to get the case to be relitigated so that he can try to get this man off because he was wrongly convicted. Stephen Miller, what did you think of Just Mercy?
One of my main thoughts in this movie that I wrote down is, should we just not have an Alabama anymore? I think probably a good argument could be made that we shouldn't. But in all seriousness, this film, in many ways, it actually reminded me of Dark Waters, at least at first. That was the procedural starring Mark Ruffalo that we reviewed late last year, in that there are flourishes here, but the story is really the point. Like, it isn't trying to hide what it is about. And the point is to tell the story of Johnny D. McMillan, highlight how terribly easy it can be to abuse the criminal justice system and how deeply unfair it is, especially to the Black community. This is the sort of movie that, for better or worse, is kind of impossible to take in without knowing that it's based on a true story. Like, I think there are things in this movie that if it were not true, I would feel uncomfortable with. Like, there are certain aspects of this narrative that feel very much like there's the one good man, racism is a thing that the good man can fix by changing people's hearts. There's a DA character in this film that, in particular, some actions that happened towards the end kind of started to play into that in a way that, if I were basing this as a critique of a story that was written from scratch, that was meant to depict the problems with our justice system, I would have a few mild criticisms. But there's a scene in the middle of this movie which is not about Michael B. Jordan or Jamie Foxx's character. It's about a character played by Rob Morgan, named Herbert Richardson, and it kind of is perfect for me. It really just sets the tone of a film that is trying to do what Destin Daniel Cretton does best, which is empathize with people in a not clever or coy or particularly cool way, just like get that human empathy, right? Elicit the soulful feeling. It reminded me of the rap that Lakeith Stanton does in Short Term 12, where it's just silence, watching this heartbreaking thing happen, and just letting it be the heart-tugging moment that it's meant to be. It reminded me a lot of a show that I really love called Rectify, which I've probably proclaimed on this podcast before.
You've definitely talked about it.
Yeah, that's a show about a man who spends 20 years on death row before he's acquitted based on DNA evidence. And it's kind of about him reacclimating to society with little flashbacks of what it was like when he was stuck there. And my favorite parts of Rectify are looking back to how he interacted with his cellmates, right? These people who knew that they are destined to die. They have lost all hope that anything will get better. And we have that here in the characters of Johnny D. McMillan, played by Jamie Foxx, Herbert Richardson, played by Rob Morgan, and Anthony Ray Hinton, played by O'Shea Jackson Jr., or Ice Cube's son. And not that much screen time is devoted to their interactions, but they really, really made the movie a lot more special for me. There's just something about trying to get in the mindset of what it would be like to have your fate be completely decided already. And the show kind of runs the gamut. I'm reminded a little bit of Lion, again, where it seems like they are telling a true story, but shading it with other true stories that there may be. I don't know if the timelines are as clean as they make them out to be in the movie, but they're trying to show you the gradient of what could happen, right? There's the man who is innocent. I think it won't be a spoiler to say that Johnny D. McMillan is innocent. If it is, I'm sorry. That's kind of the premise of the movie. You kind of accept that very early on.
Yeah, the description on IMDb refers to it as working to free a wrongfully convicted death row prisoner. We're at the baseline of hey, we're okay to talk about that.
Yep. So we have him on one end. We have O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s character, who I don't think we are ever made to really know, but we suspect innocence in that case as well. And then we have Rob Morgan's character, who did the thing that he is being put on death row for. There's no question of that. And it asks us to look at each of them and think, do these men deserve to die, right? Is there a way for a person to be guilty and still be mistreated by the justice system? And I thought that was a really interesting angle that it throws into it, that there can be injustice even when the person is, quote, guilty, right? There are different types of mercy and different forms of grace that we're more likely in society to show one person than another, and that can be wrong no matter what. So I thought that was an interesting wrinkle that it threw in, that this is not just a man who is trying to get people out of prison who have done no wrong. It's a man who is trying to make sure the system is fair regardless of what they've done. So there were still times that I felt like it got a little too close to the one good man, in particular when it became... Anytime Brie Larson is on screen for too long, this movie started to feel a bit more sentimental than I would be happy with. And I tried to keep reminding myself, this is based on a real person. You know, this woman existed. This is Bryan Stevenson' autobiographical account of what happened. So he's elevating the people he wants to elevate. But there's just something about the brave white lady in the South who just is willing to risk anything because it's just not fair. Like, some bits of that, I got little flashbacks of Remember the Titans or something in a manner that I was not that thrilled with. But those were few and far between. Like, the bulk of this movie is...
I was pleasantly surprised how inconsequential she is to this story. It never hinges on her. She's more of a catalyst for targeting this location in Alabama versus being the one who can rally support from anyone. Like, she's always sitting in the back of the courtroom watching and just giving reaction faces. It doesn't hinge on her participation, which was a thankful part of this film.
A pleasant surprise, because about 15 or 20 minutes in, I was getting a little worried that she was going to be centered. I mean, partly that's just because it's Brie Larson. She's been the unambiguous star of the last two movies that Cretton has done. So I was just kind of bracing myself for that. But I do think her role is similar to what I like about how he made this movie, where it is not centering her. It's trying to just elevate these stories. And I think Jamie Foxx is fantastic in this movie. He becomes the story. I kind of feel like, I love Michael B. Jordan. He is great in this role, but the role doesn't ask him to do very much beyond being the man with conviction, the man who wants to do the right thing. And I think Jamie Foxx is really the one that gets to carry our emotions through this movie. And when it starts to fixate on that and just the experience, and the courtroom stuff almost becomes not an afterthought, but it's more about the emotional journey of this character feeling his hope be brought back for maybe the first time, and then moments when potentially that hope is negated again, and how crushing that would feel. I thought all of that was really, really beautifully done. So in the end, I think it does play with a lot of inspirational film beats, but the truth of the story and the acting behind it really carried it for me and made it really powerful, actually. Powerful kind of in spite of the way I was coming at it at the beginning, where there were all the things I was afraid it was going to do. At a certain point, that scene in the middle of the movie, I really just kind of let go and let the movie be what it wanted to be, and I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah. I think that what the most interesting part about this film is how not flashy and not over the top it is. It would be really easy to want to tell a story like this and try to have really, really big moments with like huge speeches. But instead, this film plays it more subtle and really just lets the ridiculousness of the charges that are put against McMillan, and lets that be the shocking thing. Like obviously there's moments of, you know, family members responding to things or conversations where you can feel the hurt and the anguish that somebody feels. But I think that this film really lets you slowly work through it, and it spends no time showing you how ridiculous the charges were in the first place. And then it's almost to the level where when Michael B. Jordan comes in, he looks at the case and he's like, this is going to be easy. Like any lawyer or any DA should be able to just look at this single piece of paper and just throw this case out and call it a day and my job's done. And what he's met with is a just ridiculous combination of people who don't even at this time, like, so this film takes place long after the initial conviction and that trial. Like, the DA now was not the DA when this case was originally taking place. So he has no skin in the game. He just doesn't want to take the time to look at it and overturn some old thing because
he's the system, right? There's that heavy bias of this is going to be unpleasant, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. And this film really shows that is really like the key to what this film is doing, is showing you just this process of how loosely the system convicted this man, and how hard it was to just pull back and go like, hey, you can see how ridiculous these charges are. Just frickin' overturn this case and let us get a retrial, because obviously any jury is going to find him innocent if we can just do the trial again. And I really found that, like, not a breath of fresh air, but I think it's an interesting way to approach this story, because it doesn't over dramatize the seriousness of the case. It's almost trying to downplay like just how simple it is, that the situation that he was in, and make you get, you know, upset about what was going on. I mean, you know, everyone in the United States watched Making a Murderer, right?
Except for this guy.
You didn't even watch that, but you watched Tiger King though. So
oh yeah, I've seen everything else in the world.
Like, everybody was obsessed with that and trying to watch like how this system, how manipulative everybody was to try to get these people convicted. And they didn't even have to try that hard. They just said, this is the guy who's guilty. Had somebody say like, yeah, I remember seeing his truck. And then boom, this guy's on death row. And it seems like it should require more than that. Like when they're going to the courtroom to argue all the evidence for why he must be innocent, it was kind of like, is it just going to be the one thing? Like I don't know. It's just such a ridiculous system or situation and system, obviously. And I really like that this film just went through there. But I think the key of it is the relationships of the people, and watching how the other people who witness this attempt at getting justice changes how they see things. I don't know. I even like the evil guard person, right? Like he is somebody who works in a prison that is a death row prison, right? He's at a place where he knows people are going to be executed. But then when he actually sees somebody get executed, it makes it real in a way that he just somehow didn't conceive of when he was working there. Like, his whole persona changes just having witnessed an execution for the first time. So there are like little moments in this where you see how other people respond to having to see the logical conclusion of the system that they're playing into. That sort of makes them realize that the people they're killing are human in a way that they hadn't thought of to that moment. And I like those moments in this film, that it didn't like try to oversell it. It just let you watch these people react, and that's all it needed to say.
Yeah. Did you ever listen to In the Dark season 2, the story of Curtis Flowers?
I I might have just listened to season 1, but
because season 2, you would probably recognize it because it is uncannily similar to Johnny D. McMillan's story, except it is currently happening.
Yeah.
It's Mississippi instead of Alabama, and there's a different DA, Doug Evans, but there was this man, Curtis Flowers, who was arrested for this killing. I think it was like a quadruple homicide, and the only evidence they had were basically multiple shaky eyewitness accounts that linked him to walking in the direction of the place that it happened. Like, they had nothing.
Yeah.
And he was not only tried, and he was always either had a hung jury or he was convicted and then it was overturned by the Supreme Court above him. And that happened like 7 or 8 times in a row. So he'd been in jail for like decades without having ever had a successful conviction. And it just, if I had not listened to that relatively recently, I would look at this story and think, wow, this must be 1 in a million. You know, it's crazy how little evidence they had. And that just seems like what happens.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying. And the podcast interviews, white people in the town and asks them their opinion. And they have the same circular logic of, because the crime was heinous, I'm therefore going to assume that this man did it, and act as if you are asking me, should I not have revenge on this person? And you see that same twisted logic in the DA and other people who are talking and grandstanding in this courtroom case, where they're saying, I want people to feel safe. I think we should be talking more about the brutal murder of this girl. And the fact that that doesn't prove anything, like, almost doesn't matter. That's how heavy the appeal to emotion in this kind of us versus them way of thinking about the justice system works. And
yeah,
it's crazy. It is really, really, really crazy.
Yeah. And I think one thing that this film doesn't dive too much into, but it seems, maybe I'm reading too much into the periphery story, but it definitely feels like the initial cops that arrested him were targeting specifically because he had his own business and potentially this other extracurricular activity he was involved in.
Right.
And that is also like a terrifying thought. Like, they're not, they're not blatantly just coming out and murdering this person, but they are putting him to death row with not even a thought at all into the result of what's going on. They're just trying to get him off out of the town. Like, it's kind of an insane thing that you can just be so mad at somebody that you're just going to like make up a crime and totally be happy with the justice system letting off whoever actually killed this person because you don't like this one guy, so you frame it on him.
And I think it's this trick of dehumanization where you find a passive voice or another way to say what is happening. So it isn't, I am killing Johnny D. McMillan. It's, he was tried and convicted, therefore he did it. And somehow that becomes the self-fulfilling argument, even when what is being held in front of your face is, here's evidence that the conviction was not good. It becomes this way to not have to worry about it. And it kind of, so Joanna and I are watching The Wire now too. We started it because we finished The Sopranos a few days ago. And The Wire is kind of all about bureaucratic systems everywhere. And in particular, the police as this kind of self-serving system where everyone just wants to get the best stats they can in a given year. They just want to clear it. They want to check that box and move on. If there's a public outcry, they want to quench the public outcry. And something about watching that and then pausing to watch this movie, it just really felt like this is what happens when you get a bunch of people who don't see the people they're prosecuting as humans, right? They just see it as a statistic or a part of the job they have to fill. Is they go to bed at night and they might doubt whether or not the person is guilty, but not enough to toss and turn, not enough to change, just enough to be like, well, that was another day on the job. Maybe my partner shouldn't have made that argument. Maybe pressuring the witness wasn't a good idea, but, it's done. tomorrow's another day. And that ability to just walk away is kind of terrifying. Also, Michael B. Jordan as like a 14-year-old boy is in The Wire, and it was pretty crazy seeing him at 14 and then seeing him in this movie right after that. It's a trip.
Nice.
I did want to say, so I really love the music in this movie. That was one thing that I noticed a lot. There are some great moments where it just kind of pauses and shows you a wide shot of a little road with trees in the background, and it tends to play this booming kind of gospel choir music while a little car drives by. And the soundtrack was made by Joel P. West, who's the same one who did Short Term 12, even though it sounds nothing like it. So I think whatever his idea is of like what makes a good emotional soundtrack, I'm just in Joel West's corner, because for me this was another home run.
Yeah.
One thing that I want to say without dipping into spoilers is there is a credits bump, like, is that what you would call it, where they reveal information at the very end in the credits,
like the title card or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In the title card they tell you where everyone wound up, which very effective, right? If this is the kind of movie that they actually did the work of making almost everyone look like the real person, even though they are not famous people. Like they didn't have to do that. But those side-by-side images are pretty surprising. But there's one character in particular that when they let you know what happened to them, a part of me wondered, why was he not the focus of this movie? And I think it's smart that they chose to focus on the character they did instead, but it is interesting because it kind of has its most shocking reveal at the very, very end.
Cool. What do you say, Stephen, we get to our verdicts for this film?
Let's do it.
All right. Stephen, if you're going to give us a must-see, recommend with a caveat, wait for rental, pass with a caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
I think if this were not based on a true story, if it were not for that credit sequence that reminded me that all of these characters, as far as I can tell, all of them really did exist, I would probably be in recommend with a caveat territory, because there are some things where it still seems to be pushing for the individual great people who combat a broken system, and there's a little bit of hero worship in there, which I didn't always love. There's a big speech that Tim Blake Nelson gets in a courtroom that felt like another movie could easily have been all of those things, and the fact that a few of them still exist feels a little bit jarring to me. But the reality of it and how kind of painstakingly they worked to depict it, and then just the kind of the jarring truth of the story elevated it for me. And in particular, when you're dealing with life and death situations, remembering that these were real people who really went through that really just added to the emotional core. So things which in a pure fiction maybe would have felt mildly emotionally manipulative worked for me, because I felt like I can be manipulated in this case. Like, it's fine. So yeah, this was a must-see for me. I don't know, out of quarantine brain, maybe if I were at TIFF in my more critical hat, I would have rounded it down to a recommend with a caveat.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to watch this film without the context of the world we're currently in. I mean, we're watching it specifically because of the world that we're in. But yeah, I think that the way it handles the story and how cut and dry and obvious the overturning should be, and still the constant roadblocks that the character is met with trying to solve this problem. I mean, when you watch any courtroom or law or DA program show movie, there's always somebody who can make a statement or an argument, and you just want to be like, like, yep, that guy's gonna win right there. Like, that guy nailed it. And this film shows that there are some things that are stronger than arguments. That where like everything can be cut and dry and be super obvious, and you can expect a particular outcome, and that might not be the outcome you get because things are just not stacked in your favor. So yeah, I'm going to give this a must-see. I thought it was an interesting telling of a simple story, which is elevated by how preposterous it should be, but it's not. Cool. Well, I think that it's going to bring us to the end of this review of Just Mercy. Stephen Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
If people want to find me, they can go to twitter.com/sdavidmiller or sdavidmiller.com.
People can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or twitter.com/ChristopherIRL. You can find the podcast over at thespoilerwarning.com, where you can get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so on Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want to know when the episodes go live, you can follow us at twitter.com/spoilerwarning, facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. Music for this episode will come from the soundtrack to Just Mercy, so hopefully you're enjoying that. And yeah, that is our review. We have another review that'll come later in the feeds of the film Shirley, so hopefully you'll stick around and listen to that eventually. But yeah, we are going to take off, and we'll see you in the next review. Bye.
Bye.